Now, you may be in a situation where you're buying your first bow or buying a bow for somebody else, and there are three things perhaps which people will have trouble with. Number one is what color you want. Number two is how long the bow should be. And number three is the draw weight. And that's the one we'll be focusing in this video. And the reason why I want to discuss this in a bit more detail is that it is perhaps the single most important thing which will make or break you as an archer. It may get people into the sport, or it may cause long-term injury. And you also get a lot of contradictory information which will assume things like your height or your body weight or how fit you are or how much you want to deadlift. And you combine that with the need to go hunting or do historical archery. And then you have the innate desire to shoot a heavy bow as possible because it's a bit of an ego thing. So because there are so many different ways to gauge what draw you need, it can be quite confusing. What I want to do this time around, instead of using any charts or recommendations based on you as the person, is I want to list out the common reasons, goals or purposes for which people do archery and what draw weights most people aim for within those parameters. And that can perhaps guide you based on what you want to do on what draw weight is most suitable for you. Before we go through our listing, there are a couple of caveats which I want to go into first. Number one is we generally recommend you go for lighter draw weight for whatever bracket you need it for. If you're not sure what you're getting or what you're doing, we recommend the lower end of the draw weights. This is because it's generally a safer move. You can shoot with less restrictions, you can shoot with more control, and you are less prone to being injured or fatiguing easily. And that's a general thing across the board. If you're not sure what you're capable of, we would always recommend the lighter side. It's easier to start light and work up to a heavy draw weight rather than start heavy and then try to work hard to get into it, because even if you can physically shoot the bow or draw the bow back, that doesn't mean you have any control over it or any technique issues. Think of it like weightlifting. It's really rare to recommend that you train right away at your maximum possible weight instead of gradually working up to it. Number two, if you're buying a modern bow, whether a modern trad bow with detachable limbs or a modern IOF recurve bow with the easy takedown limbs, you can just buy the limbs and swap them out. So you don't have to buy a brand new bow each time. Now, if you're buying a one-piece traditional bow, then you do have to buy a new bow. But if you're buying a takedown bow, then you can progress much more easily. So again, don't feel restricted into buying one particular bow type and bow weight. You can change and go upwards. And number three, if you're shooting compound, there is a 5-10 pound leeway. Because compound is mechanically easier to draw because of the let off, then you can actually start at a higher draw weight and feel less of the ramifications of shooting higher weights. Whereas if you're shooting a traditional bow or recurve bow, you have to hold that weight. So there's a bit less leeway with the recurve and a bit more leeway with compound. So let's start with the entry level. We call this the casual archery. And if you're watching this, it's likely that you are buying your first bow and you're not sure what you want to do with it. The casual archer is someone who does archery for recreation, someone who just wants a bow. You're not planning on hunting or competing or doing anything else with it. You just want to have a bow to keep at home, to have fun in the backyard, to share some family time, or take out to the range. There's no training, no commitment, and no real desire to progress or move to something else. And if that's the case, I would not recommend you go above 30 or 35 pounds. Again, we go lower in most cases, to 20 and 25. It would be more of a sweet spot for someone who's never done archery and doesn't plan to do archery. They just want to try it for the first time. 30 pound is a good economical choice because you feel the sense of doing archery. The arrow will go, 30, 40, 50 meters. You do feel like you're shooting a bow and arrow, and 30 pound is a good way to start archery without buying too many bows and just buy a 30 pound bow, and you will not need to change that. You can shoot, for most people, without much training, can shoot for hours on a 30-pound bow. You can experiment, you can speed shoot with a light bow, you can target shoot with a light bow, and there's no real consequence of going to 30, maybe 35 at most. Beyond that point, you do require some level of fitness and physical exertion. So if you're going 40 or 45, that's a bit too high for someone starting out, a bit too high for someone doing casually. You do need to work up towards the 40, 45 pound mark, whereas below 35 or below 30, that's a pretty accessible point for most people. And that's the reason why most archery clubs will go for around 15 to 20 pound for their club bows, because most people, children or adults, are able to use this without any extra training. Speaking of children, for youth bows, below 20 is a recommendation. Children will grow differently, and different age groups will, advance in their physical strength and development differently than others. But if you look at, say, under 12, then below 15 pounds is acceptable. Again, most kids will have very short arms and draw length, so they're actually pulling maybe 10 to 12 pounds, but 15 pounds, or maybe 20 at the very most for an older child, will be about right for them to enjoy doing archery without feeling anxious about using the bow or feeling too tired or unable to draw it. Now, if you are deciding to be a bit more serious about archery, it may be you are doing competitive shooting on target competitions, or you're just being serious in general for traditional archery, then we start moving up the draw weights. Now, for a typical target round, it's up to, say, 70 meters. You can start shooting that distance within the high 30s to the 50 pound area. So most, if you're wondering for Olympic archery, most female elite archers are around the mid 40s mark, whereas male archers tend to be in the high 40s to mid 50s. There's no real reason to go above 60. A few people might have the eccentric trait of wanting to shoot a heavier bow, but between 40 and mid 50s is a sweet spot for control and arrow velocity, which is desirable for shooting targets. So again, if you're going to be competitive and take things more seriously, then 45 pound is what you're aiming for, if not more than that, depending on your gender, strength and conditioning. And of course, if you're starting at the 25 or 30 pound mark, then you will need to eventually transition and condition through the 30s to eventually shoot a 40 pound plus bow. You don't have to, but it gives you a pretty big advantage over light draw weights if you're able to shoot a 40 to 50 pound bow. If you are hunting, then there are minimum requirements for draw weights. Depending on where you're from, it may be 40 pound or 45 pound, and people will usually err on the heavier side, especially compound, because the desire to bring down game ethically does require a certain level of draw weight in order to properly bring down the target. Otherwise, you inflict unnecessary pain and suffering, your arrows might not penetrate, and that sort of thing there. So a big note here is you might not start with the 45 pound bow. If you've never done it before and you're shooting a recurve or you're shooting compound with no experience, you may need to start on a lighter bow, then progress to your heavier bow instead of buying a 50 pound bow and jumping straight into hunting right away. That's usually not advisable. And now we reach the upper end of draw weights. Most people would never need or want to shoot above 60 pounds for any kind of bow. Compounds, again, you can stretch it out to 70, 80, 90 pounds. Some people will especially do that. There is a limit, by the way, on target shooting with compound bows. It's like 60 pounds. So beyond that, there's no point. Recurve, again, there's no real gain in shooting above 60 pounds in terms of accuracy, in terms of enjoyment in some ways. So again, most people won't go above that point. 45 to 50 pound is for any serious archer where people begin to start capping off and they'll start going sideways rather than upwards. They might get different bows instead of getting more powerful bows. Now, is there a reason to go past 60 or 70 pounds? The answer is yes. If you are pursuing historical archery or traditional archery, then that is actually where you will start seeing these super heavy draw weights. Warbow weights, start from about 70 pounds to 100 pounds or higher, but that's something which the average person cannot go straight into. It's a legitimate reason. Doing historical archery is a thing that people do, and people do make bows which are above 70 pounds to 100 plus pounds, and that's a pursuit which requires a lot of dedication and training. You can't just pick up a 100-pound bow and shoot it. Literally, when you pick up a 100-pound bow, the average person cannot even pull it back. So you do need a substantial amount of fitness, conditioning, strength and training, not only even pull it back, but to safely do it. So that's a very niche thing. Again, people will do it, but not something the average person will just casually pick up. And that's pretty much where it ends. Again, the casual archer will go on the lower end of the spectrum. If you just want to have a bow, you just want to have fun, you can have fun with a 25-pound bow or a 30-pound bow. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you want to take it more seriously, depending on what your goals are, you might be working towards the 40 or 45 or 50-pound range, and beyond that, you're a historical warbow enthusiast or something. So hopefully that breaks it down. We just simplify the processes and the purposes. So if you're doing certain things, you can match it up with what you want to do. Remember, we always recommend you start on the lighter end and work upwards. You're more prone to injury if you start too high. You're more prone to learning bad technique if you start too high, and that may ruin your experience and enjoyment of archery. You actually can't shoot the bow properly. So always start on the lower side if you're not sure. Take your time to work your way upwards and think about what you want to do when you pick your draw weight. Anyway, hopefully that helps. That's a very common question with lots of different answers, but depending on what you want to do, you will want to pick the right draw weight for you. Thank you for watching. Hope you stay safe where you are. Enjoy your archery, and hopefully we'll see you next time.